You've spent your entire life becoming someone you're not, and the worst part, you don't even realize it. Every social interaction, every relationship, every version of yourself you present to the world, it's a carefully constructed mask. Carl Jung called this the persona, but here's what nobody tells you: wear that mask long enough and you forget there's a face underneath. The person you pretend to be has slowly murdered the person you actually are. And that authentic self, the one you buried to fit in, to be accepted, to survive, is screaming to be found. But you've turned the volume down so low, you can't hear it anymore. Lost identity crisis. Today, we're going to explore 10 dangerous patterns that cause people to lose themselves completely. From the masks we wear to the shadows we deny, from the validation we seek to the boundaries we never set. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how you've been erasing yourself, and more importantly, how to find your way back. The persona trap. Jung observed something disturbing about human behavior. We don't just adapt to social situations, we literally create false selves to survive them. He called this the persona, from the Latin word for mask. Think about it. The version of you at work is different from the one with your parents. The one on social media is different from the one alone at 2 in the morning. Which one is really you? The persona is a complicated system of relations between individual consciousness and society, a kind of mask designed to make a definite impression upon others, and on the other side, to conceal the true nature of the individual. Here's the danger: we start wearing these masks as children to gain approval, to avoid punishment, to be loved. But somewhere along the way, we confuse the mask for our actual face. You become so good at performing that you forget you're performing at all. The colleague who always says yes, the friend who's always happy, the partner who never complains. None of these are personalities. They're survival strategies that calcified into prisons. And the longer you wear the mask, the more the authentic self underneath atrophies. Like a muscle you never use, it begins to waste away. But this is just the beginning of how we lose ourselves. Shadow denial. Every trait you despise in others exists somewhere inside you. Jung called this the shadow, the repository of everything we've rejected about ourselves. The anger you suppress, the jealousy you deny, the desires you're ashamed of. You push them into the unconscious, thinking they'll disappear. They don't. They grow stronger in the dark. Hidden self denied. When you refuse to acknowledge your shadow, something insidious happens. It starts controlling you from below the surface. The person who prides themselves on being kind becomes passive-aggressive. The one who claims to never get angry explodes unexpectedly. The suppressed doesn't stay suppressed. It finds expression in ways you can't control. And here's the cruelest irony. The more you deny your shadow, the more you project it onto others. You see your own unacknowledged traits in people around you and despise them for it. That coworker who irritates you for no logical reason, they're probably mirroring something you refuse to see in yourself. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Jung understood that integration, not denial, is the path to wholeness. But most people are too terrified to look, and that fear leads us to the next trap. Validation hunger. What if I told you that your desperate need for approval is slowly erasing you? Every time you check how many likes your post got. Every time you change your opinion to match the room. Every time you say what people want to hear instead of what you actually think, you're trading pieces of yourself for validation that will never fill the void. The algorithm of acceptance has hacked your identity. This hunger begins in childhood. We learn that certain behaviors get love and others get withdrawal, so we start performing. We shape ourselves around external approval because survival literally depended on it. But here's what nobody prepared us for. Adulthood doesn't cure this conditioning, it amplifies it. Social media turned validation into a measurable metric. Now you can literally count how much people approve of the curated version of you. And that curated version, it's not you, it's what you think others want you to be. Now that you see this pattern in yourself, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring the depths of your psyche with me. There's so much more to uncover, because the more approval you seek for your false self, the more the real self starves. You become addicted to a version of love that requires you to not exist, and this addiction leads directly to our next dangerous pattern. Boundary erosion. You can't have a self without edges. Boundaries define where you end and others begin. They're not walls, they're the very architecture of identity, and most people have let theirs crumble completely. Think about the last time someone asked you for something you didn't want to give. Did you say no, or did you abandon yourself to avoid their discomfort? Every time you say yes when you mean no, you teach yourself that your needs don't matter. Every time you tolerate disrespect to keep the peace, you communicate that you're not worth protecting. Every time you override your own intuition to please someone else, you betray the only person who will be with you for your entire life, yourself. Jung understood that individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, requires differentiation. You cannot merge with the collective and maintain your integrity. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But becoming who you are requires the courage to disappoint people, to be disliked, to hold your ground when the world demands you dissolve. Most people never develop this courage. Instead, they slowly evaporate into whoever others need them to be, and this disappearing act has a devastating consequence. Comparison poison. Every minute you spend comparing yourself to others is a minute you spend abandoning yourself, and in the age of social media, we're doing this constantly. You scroll through curated highlight reels and measure your messy reality against their polished fiction. The result, you conclude that something is fundamentally wrong with you. Their success, your failure. But here's what comparison really does to your psyche. It makes you lose touch with your own journey. Instead of asking, what do I actually want? You start asking, what should I want based on what others have? Your authentic desires get replaced by borrowed goals. Your unique path gets abandoned for someone else's template. Jung spoke extensively about the dangers of identification with the collective. When you measure yourself against external standards, you hand your sense of worth to forces outside your control. Comparison is the death of individuation. You become a reactor instead of an actor, a follower instead of a creator. Your entire identity becomes relative, existing only in comparison to others rather than standing on its own foundation. And the tragedy is that the person you're comparing yourself to is also performing. They're also wearing masks. You're destroying yourself trying to become someone who doesn't actually exist. This poisonous habit connects directly to something even more insidious. Authentic burial. There was a moment in your childhood when you learned that who you are is not acceptable. Maybe you were too loud and got shushed, too emotional and got mocked, too curious and got punished. Whatever it was, you received a clear message. This part of you is not welcome here. Rejected. And so you buried it. You took the most alive, authentic parts of yourself and pushed them underground. You learned to be quiet instead of loud, logical instead of emotional, compliant instead of curious. The world got a version of you it could tolerate, but you got something far worse, a life lived in exile from yourself. Jung called this loss of authentic self the greatest tragedy of human existence. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Because here's the terrible truth: whatever you buried didn't die, it just went into the shadow. That wild, creative, emotional self is still there, but now it's twisted by years of suppression. It comes out sideways in addictions, in depression, in that nameless feeling that something essential is missing. You can't have self-respect without a self, and most people buried their true self so long ago they've forgotten it existed. But it hasn't forgotten you. And this burial connects to something even more dangerous. Relationship lies. Here's a devastating truth. If you don't know who you are, no one can actually love you. They can only love the version you perform. Every relationship built on your false self is built on a falsehood. The connection isn't real because you're not real in it. They fell in love with a ghost you created. Think about what this means. That partner who says they love you, they love the mask. Those friends who seem so close, they're close to your persona, not your essence. And deep down you know this. It's why compliments feel hollow, why intimacy feels terrifying, why you can be surrounded by people who claim to love you and still feel profoundly alone. Fake love, real loneliness. Jung understood that authentic relationships require what he called the meeting of the whole person. Two people showing their complete selves, shadow included, and still choosing each other. But when you've lost yourself, you can only offer fragments, curated highlights, acceptable pieces. The relationship becomes two masks dancing together, with two strangers hidden behind them. The loneliest moment in someone's life is when they are watching their whole world fall apart, and all they can do is stare blankly. This is the inevitable result of building your life on a false foundation. But there's an even more subtle way we betray ourselves. External anchoring. Your job title, your relationship status, your bank account, your possessions, your achievements. What happens to your sense of self when any of these disappear? If the thought of losing these things triggers existential terror, it reveals something crucial. You've anchored your identity to external objects instead of internal essence. You've outsourced your self-worth to things that can be taken from you. Jung warned extensively about this psychological trap. When identity becomes dependent on external factors, you become their hostage. I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. The person who knows who they are can lose everything external and still possess themselves. But the person who has lost themselves will cling desperately to external markers of identity because without them, they face the terrifying void of not knowing who they are. This is why job loss triggers depression, why breakups feel like death, why retirement causes existential crisis. These aren't just losses of circumstance. They are losses of self for people who never developed an internal anchor. You cannot lose what you never built inside. And this external anchoring makes you vulnerable to the most seductive trap of all: collective drowning. There's comfort in disappearing into the group. You don't have to make decisions. You don't have to stand out. You don't have to face the terrifying responsibility of being an individual. You just adopt the opinions, the values, the behaviors of whatever collective surrounds you. But this comfort comes at an unbearable cost. You cease to exist as a distinct psychological entity. Groupthink kills self. Jung spent his career studying this phenomenon. He saw how easily people abdicate their individuality to mass movements, ideologies, trends. The collective provides ready-made identity. It answers all questions. It removes the burden of individual consciousness. The shoe that fits one person pinches another. There is no recipe for living that suits all cases. But here's what happens when you drown in the collective. You lose access to your own inner guidance. Your intuition atrophies. Your unique gifts wither. You become interchangeable with millions of others who made the same bargain, trading authentic selfhood for the security of belonging. And at the end of your life, you realize with horror that you never actually lived. You just conformed, you followed, you disappeared into the mass and called it safety. To be yourself in a world constantly trying to make you something else is the greatest accomplishment. Which brings us to the final and most critical pattern: individuation, death. Jung's entire life work pointed toward one central concept: individuation. The process of becoming who you truly are, of integrating all the pieces, the shadow, the persona, the rejected selves, into a coherent whole. It's the highest psychological achievement a human can reach, and most people never even attempt it. Unlived. They die with their authentic self still buried. They reach the end having spent their entire existence trying to fit in, seeking approval, wearing masks, denying their shadow. They never ask the fundamental question: who am I when I strip away everything I was told to be? The tragedy isn't death. The tragedy is dying without having lived as yourself. Jung wrote extensively about this in his later years. He watched patients come to him at the end of their lives, filled with regret for the selves they never became. The greatest tragedy of the family is the unlived lives of the parents. Because when you fail to become yourself, you don't just harm your own existence. You pass that wound to everyone you touch. Your children inherit your unlived life as their burden. Your relationships suffer from your incompleteness. The world loses whatever unique gift you were born to give. And you lose the one chance you had to be real. So where does this leave you? Standing at a crossroads you didn't know existed. The path you've been walking, the one paved with masks and approval-seeking and suppressed selves, stretches ahead into comfortable numbness. But now you see the other path, the harder one, the one that leads back to whoever you buried all those years ago. Choose your real life. Jung never promised that individuation would be easy. In fact, he warned that it would be the hardest thing you ever do, because it requires confronting everything you've spent a lifetime avoiding. The shadow, the pain, the truth of who you are beneath the performance. But here's what he also promised. On the other side of that confrontation is the only life worth living. A life where you know yourself, where your relationships are built on truth, where your boundaries are solid and your identity is your own. Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. The question isn't whether you've lost yourself. If you're human, you have to some degree. The question is whether you have the courage to begin the search, to start excavating, to strip away the masks and meet whoever is underneath. If you made it this far, comment self-reclaimed if you're ready to begin the work of finding yourself again. Welcome to the Psyche Project. If this changed how you see yourself, subscribe for more.